thank you for coming onto the podcast today, Andy Brook. I've got so much to ask you, but I know that we've only got a small amount of time. Last night, as we're recording this, there was the playback of the album The Accidental, of which you are heavily involved in. How was the event, and what is your reaction to the reaction of The Accidental?
The event was great. I must admit, Union Chapel, the last time I was there was probably about 12 to 15 years ago. I was doing front of house sound for a singer-songwriter called Scott McFarlane, so I haven't set foot in there in a long time. Obviously, this is a very different paradigm because it's a playback event, and you're not in a studio environment, so you've got to factor in the acoustics of the room. It's a very, very lively sounding room in there. So really, my involvement yesterday in the whole event was to try and fine tune the system prior to the show. Thankfully, they've got a really good in-house team, so there's very little we had to do, but it was just to kind of optimize it for playback of a record. Because really, the audience wants to be in a position whereby they're listening to it as if they were in a studio environment. Now, that's not going to happen when you've got 300 to 500 people sat all together. And invariably, some people have no kind of social decorum when it comes to sitting quietly. So there's a few people gabbing and chatting. But I think my reaction to it, it was good. But you're kind of, in that sort of scenario, you're over-analysing things because you're listening back to a record that you know in depth, you know all the intricacies because you've been through it so many times. But you're watching the reaction of everybody else. And if people aren't moving or they're not reacting in a certain way that you expect them to, then you start to query what's going on. But the actual answer to that is that most people are just listening very intently. So it's not kind of like a big boozy pile-up. Everyone is there listening to the record, many of them for the first time. So it's just them paying attention. But the reaction was great. And I think when Francis came on to do his Q&A, it was amazing. It was he was very concise, very articulate, and he relayed a lot of information that possibly he hasn't done on previous talk shows. And he's funny. He's a great raconteur. Got to give him due credit for that.
Yeah, I've certainly heard him in recent interviews talk in ways that I don't think I've heard him talk before, so I know exactly what you mean there. I couldn't get to the event, but I've heard very good things about it. The Accidental is out now via Ear Music, and I just want to get a sense, because Francis, as we're talking about, in interviews, has talked about how it came about. How did it come about from your perspective?
So Hiran is an old school friend of mine. We used to play together in a band called Makara back in the day, and some Quo fans might know Makara because we did a few support slots with Quo. And you're right, this would be like the mid 2000s, maybe 2010 sort of at the latest. Hiran was back in the country, and he was jamming with Francis. And then really, Hiram kind of persuaded Francis to go in the studio and record a couple of tracks. That's where I get involved at that point. As you may know, I've been working as Francis' studio engineer for coming up to a decade now. So it was just an ad hoc project, but it kind of grew from there. I think Francis has well documented the fact that he really enjoyed doing those sessions, and he wasn't looking to do those sessions with a view to making an album. However, it was the embryo of what was to come afterwards, and it just kind of snowballed from there. So, and it rather than having a framework set out as to this is what you need to do with this album, I think he enjoyed the fact that it was kind of open and it just follow your nose and see where it leads to. But it was a lot of fun. It was a fun project.
It definitely sounds like it. There's a lot of enthusiasm within that production and vibrancy as well. You act as co-producer. You also wrote a couple of songs. Well, you're involved in 2.5 songs because you're credited on Beautiful World as well.
Yeah.
What is the dynamic like when you're writing with Francis Rossi from your view?
I think if there's a variety of situations there. So I think if we look at the 3 tracks involved there, Dead of Night, we were on the road with Quo in 2022. No, it's a 2024 tour. So this was right at the beginning of it. And we were talking about this project because obviously if I'm on the road with Quo, that's not in the studio capacity. That's doing stage tech stuff. And he came up to me at the guitar stand and he said, do you have anything for this album? I was like, okay. So then that night I went back to the hotel room and I went through all my voice notes, because I'm one of these writers. I don't particularly focus on writing a song. It's just if I hear something that's in the ether, you grab it, you put it down on a voice note, and what happens is you come back maybe a year later and you've got hundreds and hundreds of voice memos. So you need to sift through them. So he mentioned it to me. I went back to the hotel room that night and I spent hours going through these voice notes, and I found one or two that I thought, yeah, okay, that could work, and that could be kind of up his street. And then he came back to me the next day at the guitar stand on stage, and he said, "What you got?" So then he made me play him something there and then, and not an entire song. This is the beauty of working with Francis. It's, you don't need to do it in a way that you're expected to deliver a whole song. In fact, that's not the way to do it, because that's not so collaborative. So I played him a fragment of a couple of songs, and Dead of Night was one of them. It's like, yeah, that's great. Let's use that. So that was the beginning of the writing process for me with him. And then after the tour, we went in and we just did a couple of writing sessions. And these aren't sessions that are in the studio whereby you're kind of tracking everything, you're miking it all up and making sure that everything's recorded properly. It literally is sat around the table, a couple of guitars, and just kind of exchanging ideas. And Dead of Night was what's an interesting one with that. It was pretty much finished off in the writing process before we even sat foot in the studio. Because what happens in the studio is, if you have a basic framework of a song, you can take it in there and then you start to change arrangements. It's so quick to move stuff around with Pro Tools or with Cubase. It's just quick to do that way, rather than actually kind of like, oh, sit there with a pen and paper. It's like, we're going to move this bit to this bit, etc., etc. So Dead of Night was kind of almost finished before we went to the studio. We laid that down. And then Picture Perfect was more of one of these ones where it was, there was a couple of simple ideas floating around. And then we got into the studio, and that was one that we kind of moved stuff around. We added bits in, and we sped bits up and we changed things around, so it became more of a fun project in terms of the arrangement side of that. And then the third one I was involved with, the 0.5, as you say. I'm not sure where that comes from. The 0.5 was Beautiful World, and this was a song that he began writing with Hiran, and we needed it to get it finished off for the album. So we ended up finishing, the two of us. I think on that track, my involvement is more from a lyrical perspective. But there were, but again, that was one of these ones that took shape in the studio. And Beautiful World was the last song to get tracked for the album. And to be honest with you, there was, I think for some point of time, there was a possibility that it wouldn't make it into the album, because it was long, and didn't necessarily sit with all the other tracks. But I'm glad it did, because for me, there's a lot of personal things in there lyrically, and it's kind of, I think one of the narratives is looking at the perspective of where Francis is in his career now, and how progressive it is. The fact that he's got to this age where he can reflect on what he's done, and there's no kind of uncertainty in it. It's just, he will do what he wants to do, and he's loving it and enjoying it. So I kind of tried to take that as on board as a bit of a inspiration for the lyric when we were looking at what that was going to be. And it's one that seems to resonate with a lot of old school Quo fans, and I think that's a really encouraging thing with this whole album. I remember when Backbone came out, there was as much retraction as there was commendation on it. But it's I'm quite new. I'm still quite new to the whole Quo thing. But what I see, there's an old school camp who want things to be as it was prior to 1982. But unfortunately, you can't go back in time, so you just need to progress and go forwards. But I welcome the perception that a lot of these fans are actually starting to enjoy this record. It might not be a Quo record, but then it's not labeled as a Quo record, so it's definitely a Francis Rossi album. But then again, I might get shot down for saying this, but at the end of the day, Francis Rossi is Quo. So it's kind of, where do you make the differentiation between that? I don't know. But it's good that people are on board with it.
Indeed. This album seems very reflective. I think, looking back at his entire career, there are certain things in some tracks that are kind of throwbacks to what he's done previously. But there are also a lot of new ideas in here, things that I've not heard him do before. One of which is, well, the vocals seem a lot more stretched. He's sort of going into different ranges. Yep. How long does it take to do something like that when you're like stretching vocals?
I think there's a if you were to look at it in this way, if it was a brand new artist who had no track record,
Yeah.
then to kind of experiment in the studio is a given. It's like you're finding your voice, etc. But you've got somebody who's got a career of that length and of that stature to actually try something new. It's not just about your personal willingness to do it. It's about what you expect the reaction to be from your audience. But I think on this album, it was really apparent that he was comfortable to try things. And I think one of the things about the studio environment, when it's where it is very different to the live environment, is you can fail. You can try things, you can fail, and you can try things again. And I think he's gone down on record as saying this. I would point out that one of the most interesting songs on the album in terms of production, I'm not saying it's my favorite song, but in terms of production, is Things Will Get Better.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot going on there vocally, and there's a lot of different alternate ways of singing that he exemplifies on there. And I've seen him say this in a couple of interviews now. It's like it was originally they wrote the song, him and Haran. We came into the studio to record it. It was the fact that the vocal register was too low for where he was pitching it, so it didn't work. So then he adapts this kind of operatic voice, and he pointed out this. Does that feel? Is it stupid? Does it feel wrong? But then within a couple of weeks, it becomes the sound of the song. That's how that song sounds. It's not about feeling unconfident about it or feeling embarrassed about it. I think that's a really beautiful thing about working on a record. It's like you have time to develop things and get comfortable with stretching yourself. I think another example of that is Back on Our Home Ground. Now that essentially is a one-take vocal, and for him to go in and just knock that out is quite an amazing feat. There's a lot of rawness to that vocal. It's a very bluesy track, and it kind of illustrates a very, very different vocal sound to it. In fact, when John Edwards came in to lay the bass parts, we started to look at that track. He said, "Who's singing on that one?" That's Francis. It's like, oh, it's just because it's night and day compared to what he does normally. It's not going for that traditional Quo Francis Rossi sound. So I mean, that is still in there in some songs, but I think you're right. It's a great way of viewing it, Jamie. It's that he stretched his vocals on it. And I think he feels that he's stretched his ability as a writer, and production-wise as well. We've kind of gone in a fairly different direction on this one. Yeah. Whilst maintaining the same kind of core focus, if you get my meaning.
I do. Leon Cave, who plays drums on this album, said publicly on his social media that there was a very unique way in which the drums were approached here. I'm paraphrasing, but essentially he was only given a couple of tries listening to it, and then he had to map it out himself. Is that correct? Is that what happened?
I think. Yeah, I think what people fail to understand sometimes is actually how good a musician Leon Cave is, and not just from the perspective of being a drummer, but also as a writer, as a guitarist, as a vocalist, as an arranger. Like he is insanely good. I've had the pleasure. I mean, Leon again was in Makara back in the day before he was in Quo. So I've had the pleasure of working for a long, long time, and then we recently did a couple of albums with the Midnight Men, which again Leon was involved in, and I was playing guitar for. So I've spent a lot of time working with him. I've got a lot of admiration for him, and yeah, that is the summation of what happens in some situations when you're producing a record. You'll send out demos to the performers. They'll get to learn the songs quite intricately. They'll learn the arrangements. They'll see what the nuances are, where there are pushes, where there might be some rhythmic variation, etc. So they kind of got it all mapped in before they come to the studio. I don't know if I experienced this before working with Francis, but I think his approach to it is quite unique. And kind of old school as well. It's systemic of what you would do with session musicians back in the day, whereby they'd come into the studio, they hear the track 2 or 3 times, and they would have the chops and they would have the skill to be able to just chart it down, play a take, and then they'd be off to the next session in the studio around the corner. It's kind of that was the factory kind of model back in the day of how session musicians worked. But Leon is very much of that kind of level. He'll go in. We would sit there, we'd listen through to it once. He'd map it out, listen through to it a second time just to check the chart, and then he'd go in, do 2-3 takes. In fact, on this one, it was mostly 2 takes. I like to get 3 takes, just so you've got coverage. And it's not that one take is better or worse than the other. In fact, as long as I've been doing this, I always feel that the first take has all the energy. The second take will always be a bit more technical, a bit more pristine. And then usually the third take is a summation of the two of them. That's the one we go with. But then you always kind of cut back to the first take because there might be a little bit of magic in there that you want to keep on. But that's how it works. And Liam was fantastic. In fact, the only reason he got called back was so that we could do Beautiful World, because that hadn't been recorded yet. He smashed out the album straight away. And when we did Beautiful World, just to kind of get by in the initial tracking process, I made up a drum track taken from parts of other songs that he'd already recorded for the album, and we stuck it together, and it sounded fine. But at the end of the day, there's the magic of the human interpretation, and I have to say the magic of Leon's interpretation as well, because it's not him playing to that song. We've taken bits and pieces from other parts of the album, just so you've got kind of core rhythm track to work to. But then obviously when we got him back for the second day to do Beautiful World, it became a completely different monster. It was just nice having his human interpretation of it. I did see there was a comment I saw online somewhere by an avid Quo fan who remarked on the drum sound for this album. Actually, I've seen a few comments on the drum sound of this album. Now it feels like we've kind of pushed it in the mix much more to the forefront, which is good. I think if you're looking in terms of a more modern rock production, it kind of the weight really has to sit there. It's still guitar heavy, but really the drums need to kind of be forefront and center, almost the same sort of level as a vocal. But somebody mentioned about November again. It's like, oh, it's definitely a programmed drum kit. They're definitely using samples. And I can categorically say there's no drum replacement, there's no samples. That what you hear on that track is Leon playing. So there's been edits maybe where we've cut one bit from one take to another, which is kind of standard procedure. But what will often happen in productions these days is that you'll record a kit, and then you'll resample the kick drum, then you resample the snare, resample the toms, etc., etc. And by the end of it, you've got a very crisp, clean sounding kit. We didn't do any of that on this. And when I saw Leon last night at the playback event, I was kind of saying to him, that snare, the snare sound you hear on the record, that is all you. That's you. That's how hard you're hitting. That's where the mic is placed in relation to the snare. It's good tuning on the snare. It's great performance, and it's great dynamic from the drummer. The only thing that's on there is a compressor, and that's kind of standardized kind of kit. An 1176, if my friend who's asking about sample replacement needs to know. But yeah, that's an acoustic kit, and very proud of that. I think the other thing, the same situation with John Edwards. Again, comes through, listens to it once or twice, and then just plays. And he played a blinder on the whole album. I think Francis had him in. Originally, he was going to do 2 tracks on the album, but they were so good that he ended up staying for tea and then some. But yeah, it was a pleasure.
Yeah, it says that there is additional bass provided by another musician. How much did they play on the album?
So Jules Eccleston, again, he did the whole album. It was the same sort of situation. Comes in, did a précis of the tracks. I couldn't quite give you the breakdown from memory, but there's a mix of appearances there. But I think it's quite distinctive how both of them play. So it's easy to work out to the discerning ear, as it were.
Yeah. We've already touched upon equipment because you mentioned the compressor there. The keyboard sounds on this album, or the sound effects, really. Where do they come from? What gear are you using to achieve some of those things?
So predominantly we're working within Logic. So there's a lot of stock stuff then from Logic's own library. We pulled out a couple of modules from Francis's storage, as it were. Also, so there was Proteus keys. There's a Roland module. I think it's a 1080 that we were using. And then I think the most obvious use of keys might be again on November again, which is the DX7, the Yamaha DX7, which is one of the first programmable synths that you could get.
Yeah.
I think it's 1982, 1983. But it was he was like, let's get that out. Okay, so we got it out. And compared to what the kind of nuances of the workflow that we are used to these days in terms of Logic, where you can just pull something out instantaneously, it's actually quite a slow process. But it's great. It's kind of revisiting these sounds because you've got there's a not to be contradictory, but there's a certain kind of analog element to using a hardware synth or hardware module. And there's the whole thing about running it through a preamp and running it through the channel itself, and it adds coloration to it. So it's never quite as clean as what you get straight from out of the box if you're working with Logic. And it's pleasant because you're confined to the restrictions and the parameters of the equipment that you're using, as opposed to having this open-ended palette. where you can pretty much have everything you want. But November Again was great for that. It's all DX7 tracks on there, and they're kind of, rather than programmed in and kind of meticulously quantized, they were just played in, kept as audio, and that was the basis of the track. November Again was a real surprise. That was, I think, that was a bit of a slow starter in terms of getting it to where it was production wise. But when it came into its own, it's like, wow, this is something else. And it was a song that I noticed appealed to a lot of people who wouldn't traditionally have gone and listened to a Francis Rossi record, or certainly not a Quo record. So it has that mass appeal. Good track.
Yeah, I agree. November Again has an acoustic sound. Now, from what I read, those are the guitars, or the same make of guitars, that you use on the acoustic tours. Is that correct?
You've got good researchers, Jamie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the Fender Acoustasonics, exactly that. And it's you with the Acoustasonic, you've got a variety of sonic textures within it. I think there's 10 different voices in total. But what you hear on that record is the exact same settings that we use on the songbook and on the Tunes and Chat tour. Yeah, that was an example of a session whereby the core bed track was played live. So Hiran and Francis were playing those guitars live and playing off of each other while I'm sat there pushing the buttons. And that's what made it to the end track. I think that's one of the things that's really important about this album as well. Similar with Backbone too, is that the embryonic stage makes it from the beginning of the process all the way to the final record. So even if it's not the forefront of the mix, those kind of initial rough recordings are still present actually within the record itself. It kind of keeps it on track. There's not too much deviation or disparity.
No. How much guitar did Hiran play on this album? Because he co-wrote a great number of the songs on the album. You know, With Yourself seems to be a huge influence. How much guitar did he play? Lots, yeah?
I would have to sit down and tot up the exact number of tracks, but he appears on guitar on a lot of the songs, yeah.
Yeah.
I think maybe the only one, no, there might have been a couple where he didn't play on, but he did write. And that wasn't because he wasn't invited to, it was just because of his availability. He would have been overseas. But certainly the first few songs that he co-wrote, he's on there guitar-wise. And like I said, similar to what we did with November Again, it was a live cut of him and Francis playing, and that's what made it to the end record. And then, you know, Francis did a lot of additional guitars and licks and fills over the record. So that happens progressively later on in the process. But yeah, as a core bed, and I think that this is a really good production technique that I learned from Francis. I think it's like, as a core bed, even if you don't have the whole band playing live, if you've got at least two of the musicians doing it, then it kind of adds something to it. And I think that's particularly true when it's the writers of the song as well. There's that extra kind of effort that goes into it, I think.
Yeah, there's an energy there. It's been hinted, as we close this, it's been hinted that there might be more on the way. Are you guys working on that at the moment, or is it just see how the album does and then proceed?
I think there's not, honestly, at this stage in the process, and bearing in mind that we're in the week of when that album will go to the official charts. From what I've seen, it's looking really healthy. So this album will do well. I've got no second thoughts on that. And I think, as Francis has alluded to in his previous week, we are going into the studio this week. In fact, tomorrow I'm going to go set up, but we're going into the studio to start recording new songs. Whether that becomes an album, I don't know. It depends what happens in the future. But if we circle back to the reason why this album began, it was the fact that Francis was going into the studio and he was enjoying making songs, recording songs, not with a view to marketing them as an album. It's just recording material. And I think it's quite a beautiful thing, because it's kind of going back to the reason that a lot of people get into this is not for success, but it's actually just to make music. But obviously the difference being there is he's been a very successful musician.
Yeah, and appears to be enjoying it immensely. A lot of people will recognize you as the person who sits on stage with Francis playing that secondary acoustic guitar. You're going out into Europe over the next few months or so, and then a UK tour. Just kind of a quick sum up, like what is that like, playing those gigs?
It's fantastic. I think one of the differences between doing this show and anything I've ever done before is that you've got a super appreciative audience. The only other time I've ever seen that in my life was I tour in India quite a bit in the summer. In fact, I've got one coming up this summer as well. And generally, the places we go to when I did a show in India are the kind of venues or the kind of areas where they don't see live music. So again, it's that feeling of appreciation. Whereas I think when you do a lot of rock concert gigs, there's an expectation, and they're two very, very different things. Expectation is a transactory thing whereby people have paid for a ticket and it's like, come on, entertain me. Whereas what I've noticed with the Tunes and Chat tour and the Songbook tour is that the audience that come to see Francis just absolutely appreciate the fact that they're there and that he's still doing this at that age. And they're kind of, in one way or another, they're reliving their youth, listening to this whole catalogue from the beginning of Quo's career all the way up to present day. And it kind of just sparks something off. It's nice to watch, because as much as they're watching Francis, I'm watching them and seeing what their reaction is. And I've never seen anybody look disappointed. It's good. I love it because you're seeing that it brings happiness to people, and they're loving the fact that they've got Francis on stage and he's performing and he's doing it particularly well. That's the other thing as well. There's so many reviews coming back saying that the expectation is that at a later age that possibly the performance won't be up to scratch, but that's not what we're reading, and that's not the feedback that we're seeing. I think people are really quite surprised by actually how good he still is as a performer, as a vocalist, and as a guitarist. And I have to say, on the evidence of the album, also as a songwriter and a producer.
Indeed. The Accidental is available now on streaming and physical media in CD, clear and black vinyl, plus you guys will be going out on tour. I'll leave all the links in the description below. Where are your social media accounts? Where can people find you?
Me, it's the suffix is Andy Brook Sonic. Mm-hmm. But don't look for me. Go and look for Francis. More importantly, follow him.
Well, from all of the fans, thank you for the work that you've done on this album. Good luck for the future. Hopefully you can come back if there's anything else coming up. And thank you for being a guest on the podcast today.
Always a pleasure, Jamie. Good to see you.